here I am this morning. I think Doug decided there wasn't really enough time on Monday to get anyone decent preparing. Sort me out. So he just said, Christian, do it. I think that's the plan. So anyway, but listen, we're going to look at this passage this morning. Well, actually, in theory, we're covering the whole three first chapters of Genesis. I never stood up here with some kidding in my bottom before. Curious feeling. Thank you very much, anyway, yeah, so we're going to look at, on the face of it, the first three chapters of Genesis. But this series is called My Favourite Bible Story, and I've really cheated horribly. And the full extent of my treachery and nicking will not become apparent until the very end of the talk. So suffice to say, I've left nowhere for anyone else to go, in theory. So why do I want to choose such a painfully difficult chapter? I mean, who on earth, in these days of everything equality, wants to read out and do a sermon about women being made out of ribs taken out from men? I mean, it's just a nightmare, isn't it? It's looking like it happen. It's the whole creation story. Hey? I do actually teach for a living, but I don't actually use these. So sorry about that. Where was I? Yeah. This is a really challenging area because, it's one that I've taken an enormous interest in, and I've become very sensitive over the years, although I think I've probably laid it to bed a bit. But there is this, God made the world, and then there's science. And, we're told that there's this horrible clash between the two, and that the two don't meet, and that science proves that God doesn't exist. That's all utter baloney, right? The two are totally different. And the other thing is, I'm very aware that there's this major debate over do you take the Bible literally or not. And I just, because I was if I was sitting where you were, I'd want to know where I stood. I am not a literalist. All right, now, that's really as far as I need to go, because to be perfectly honest, having spent ages looking into it and thinking about it, I am fairly convinced that it's a fairly good position to be in, but I can't say 100% certain that I'm right, can I? And I don't want to upset anyone, so let's kind of say, right, well, let's just kind of move on and accept that there is different ways of looking at this. But I think the key thing is that when we really look at what the creation story is all about, we actually realise that the argument between science and religion is utterly irrelevant. It's so much more important than that. It's how do you describe the infinite in a few thousand words? I mean, how did you do it? But you couldn't. I don't think I'd like to try. But anyway, what I want to do really is just to pick out four little things that I think come out of this story. There's loads and loads of stuff that comes out of the creation story, but four particular areas that I think provide the basis for everything else. And I can honestly say that having been a Christian my entire life, I suppose I believed in God when I was a child, and I became more convinced and understood it more as I grew up. But I've never yet, honestly, come up with an experience or a circumstance in life that cannot be explained and understood in the context of the first three chapters of Genesis. They cover the whole condition. So you see, partly why my cheat is choosing my favourite Bible story. Without this story, there are no other stories. So it's a bit of a cheat, really. And interestingly enough, this is the one page in my now slightly frail Bible that's falling out, so obviously I have used it a few times over the years. But what we've got in this story is a real mixture. I said, it's a question that my son heard in a talk and put to me. He said, what would you write if you were asked to write a creation story? And it would be very different to this, probably, but the point is, it's this glorious mixture of things that, it's about literal truth, Let's not be in any shadow of a doubt there. It's about literal truth. But is everything that is described literally what happened? I don't know. Does it matter? Does it matter if Jesus' parables actually happened or not? Because I don't think it does. I may not even have thought about it. You know, when Jesus told a parable, was it a real story or did he make it up to kind of illustrate a point? Don't know. But if we approach this in that kind of sense, it actually really doesn't matter whether these things literally happened as described or not. But let us make no mistake, this is the truth. But it's the truth expressed in a mixture of factual information and emotion that's trying to describe and get us to feel what went on. It's about observation, but it's also about describing your interpretations of the observation. It's got words. There's word pictures. There are explanations and exclamations within this story. You know, it's a real mixture of things that you might say, well, this is objective and this is subjective. But the point is, it's trying to describe something that is pretty much impossible to describe without knowing about atoms or electromagnetic radiation or any of that kind of stuff. Right? So it's just a wonderful, wonderful story, and let's look at a few things about it. So the first key message that comes out of this whole story is that this universe is not an accident. Right? It's as simple as that. Like a stop. That's it. Just absorb that fact. You know, the universe is not an accident. It's not a fluke. It wasn't some, I can't say miraculous chance, because clearly miraculous would be the wrong word to use. But it was not a kind of a chance happening. It's a story that says that things were created with a purpose. And I do want to have a brief little thing about evolution, because, you know, again, it's one of those horrible kind of things, oh, evolution or God. Well, why can God not have made things via a process of evolution? Well, because it doesn't say so here. Yes, I get that. But I hope this isn't too heretical, but I have said to people who don't believe in the past that, think about it, any old God worthy of being a God should be able to create life. You know, if you can't create life, you can't really call yourself a God, can you? Because it's pretty fundamental stuff. But our God, the God, created life that has life. You know, created life that developed and evolved and had a life of its own. And is where we are now. And what an amazing way to fill this universe with life. So, you know, again, yeah, that's my speculation, that little bit. But you know, let's not feel that these things are a problem. Right? But the universe is made for a purpose. And it's one of the things that comes up most frequently when I talk to people who are not Christians. Right? Typically at work, I suppose, in a lot of cases. An awful lot of people, in fact, society in general, it would seem these days, has been fed on a diet of very weak assumptions, very poorly conceived atheism. And they've not really been given any alternative. The number of times I've just related I don't know, please don't get the impression I'm preaching the gospel all the time. Like, I'm not. It's not my job, and I have to be careful, and it would be inappropriate if I did. But there are these little opportunities where you get the chance, be it with students or colleagues. When you tell them a little story about something that Jesus said, like I remember telling a colleague about the fact that Jesus said that it's not the well that need a doctor, it's the sick that need a doctor. And he said, oh, that's rather good, isn't it? And I've known that story since I was a child. He'd not really heard that kind of thing. So I said to him, look, what you're doing as a special needs student development type person, you're a doctor. So telling him he's actually doing God's work, even though he's not a believer. True, I believe it. So, you know, atheism, most people who call themselves atheists are very passionate, but not particularly well thought through, and the logic is often not there. So the one thing I have learnt over the years is that, you know, it is no shame to believe in God who made this universe deliberately with an order and a purpose and everything in it. Therefore, it means that every one of us has been made deliberately with an order and a purpose. Now, there's, I can't get too wrapped up in lots of Bible readings, but I do feel it's important to try and anchor things down a bit, otherwise you might think I'm inventing all this stuff. But in Romans chapter 1, verses 21 to 23, for although they knew God, that's people, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. How many times have you been watching a science program and they say, well, we don't know how, but somehow it evolved? It's a big hole to leave there. I mean, the people talk about God of the gaps, where if you don't understand something, they say, oh, that's the bit that God did. Well, nowadays we've got evolution of the gaps, that's the bit that evolution did. You listen to Richard Dawkins, I'm not actually bothered with him for quite a long while now, but there was a time when I listened to lots of stuff that he talked about. And he said, he said two things, that a beautiful example of ill-thought-out atheism. He said, teaching children to grow up in a faith is child abuse. It's evil. Can't have evil if there's no God, but by that. It's child abuse. Then I heard another talk he was doing where he's saying, should we mock Christians? Yes, we should. We should mock them. So put those two together, and Richard Dawkins says we should mock the children who have been victims of child abuse. Brought up as a Christian, let's mock you. Oh, great. Child abuse then, let's mock them now. So come on, this is rubbish logic. Where's your sense of, where does the concept of human rights come from if it's just, we just appeared? Where's right and wrong? There is nothing. Right? So it's illogical to think of a universe without God. I better move on. I did say I was going to introduce this as a series of reflections, and I thought, well, when does a reflection become a ramble? Well, you're kind of you're finding out. Okay. Right, now the next thing that comes up an awful lot at work, because being in the world of education, there's an awful lot of staff training on how to, to relate to people and all this kind of stuff, and understand the variety of people we have amongst us. And inevitably, how do you deal with a person who was born a girl but now wants to say, actually, I want you to treat me as a boy because that's what I think I am. All right? How do you treat that? How do you treat with the multitude of variations on that? Now, it's all very well to say, I don't believe any of that, but you can't. That's heartless. You've got to hear what people are saying. But I remember having a conversation with two or three of my colleagues, and we just had this staff development session on gender-based violence, which quite obviously I am not in favour of men beating up women. Can I just kind of say that in case there might be any ambiguity in what I'm about to say? But it was a really alarming session, because it made you really think about the amount of violence that goes on that is, well, I mean, all violence is wrong, isn't it? But, it was just awful. As a bloke, obviously thinking this is just terrible. But it was a useless presentation, because it didn't get to the heart of anything. Of course violence is bad, but unless you're going to address the reasons and the stories and the problems underneath that, i.e. our own sinfulness and selfishness, our own desire for gratification however we can get it, however we want it, then you're not going to make much difference, are you, to gender-based violence or any other violence. But the world doesn't want to do that. It wants to kind of get angry about the problem without, but at the same time ignoring the underlying causes, because that raises too many uncomfortable questions, like, is there a God? All right? Or if there's no God, why is it wrong anyway? Because that's actually the situation you're in. There is no right and wrong without God. I suppose, well, I'm perhaps getting out of my depth, I don't know. But I think, we are made in God's image, and if you take that approach, as I said to people at work, everyone is worthy of absolute total love and respect. That's why we're worthy of respect. It's because we are made in God's image. That's why I should love you, because I am made in God's image, and I've got to try and live according to that. We are all valuable because God gave us that value when we were made. When humanity was conceived, we were conceived in the image of God. So that's why we're all important. Right? It makes life a lot simpler to take that approach. Just treat people with love and dignity because they are made in God's image. It makes life so much simpler. And I think, one of the things is, that creativity, we talk about being made in the image of a creative God, but the thing is creativity, what is that? Painting pictures, because I can't paint pictures to save my life, I can't draw to save my life. But I can do something else. This will make my family scream. I can make string out of stinging nettles. It's become a little bit of an obsession, I've got to be brutally honest. But it's something that humanity has been doing for thousands and thousands of years, making fabrics. You wouldn't want to wear pants made out of this stuff, I can tell you. But it is incredibly strong. And it's fascinating. I've learned so much. I've even changed physically. I've got hard skin on my fingertip and thumb tip. I've learned so much. Now, making string, all right, so look what I made, Mummy. It's sort of a bit obscure, but that is creativity. All right, it's a bit niche, I'll grant you. But nevertheless, that's creativity. Smiling at someone's being creative, saying hi, helping someone across the road is creative. Doing your job well is being creative. Just being a nice person is creative. That's where being creative comes in. And making string. But the thing is, if you've ever made anything, have you ever made anything, even if it's a piece of string, and looked at it and thought, that's good? Yes. It's almost like you mustn't say that because that's being a bit proud, but I look at this and this is blinking good. I love the look of it. I love the colours. I love the neatness of the way it twists around. I love the satisfaction of this. I've learned a bit about stinging nettles. A number of people I've said, haven't you heard that expression, grasp the nettle? Yeah, I said to my oldest son, who's massively intelligent, overly educated, and he had never heard that expression before. But, I've learned about stinging nettles, I've learned about stuff. I've learned that most people are thoroughly bored by my pieces of string. But so what? I don't care. God made stinging nettles, and they taste very nice, and the tea's good as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's have a bit of a Doug moment, shall we? Yeah! Sorry, for those of you that aren't normally here, Doug does like a whoop and a yeah. Right, okay, so probably again it's time for me to move on, because I'm not saying half the stuff I've got written down here. What a waste. But I think if we're made in the image of God, or if we're told that anyone's the image of anyone else, you meet someone and you say, oh, they're the image of their mother. Right? You wonder, well, what did the mum look like? So if we're told we're made in the image of God, well, what did God look like? Or what's the nice, neat, tidy answer to what does God look like? J-E-S-U-S. Jesus. All right? God looks like Jesus. All right. Let's not worry about 2 arms and 2 legs. That God's God, he's a bit kind of amazing. We don't really know what he looks like. But we do know what his behaviour looks like. We know what his mouth sounds like. We know what his heart looks like. We know what his head looks like. We know what it looks like when we read the stories about people that are affected by meeting him. So in actual fact, we have an incredible representation to look at. And I will just read you one again just to make sure if I go to Colossians. Good old Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 16. This is what Paul says about Jesus in Colossians. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Right? So don't dismiss Jesus as being a good teacher, because apart from anything else, not many good teachers would go around claiming to be God, which is precisely what Jesus did. Not many good teachers would say, well, actually, you can only get to know God through me. But that's what Jesus said. Not many teachers are so passionate about their subject that they would be crucified in a shocking way and experience everything he did. So, don't fob anyone off with the notion that Jesus was merely a good teacher. He was all of those things. He is the image of the invisible God. So you've only got to read this here great Bible here, and all the stuff it says about Jesus, and I so wish it said more. But that's what God looks like. Right? And then you've got all the natural creation to have a look at as well, and kind of just think, blimey, this is amazing. What a great God. But anyway, so let's move on to the third thing, because oh dear. Right, third thing, we're fundamentally selfish. That's another thing that comes out of the story, isn't it? The word we're used to is sinful. I kind of have a bit of a... I don't have a problem with the word sin for what it is. The problem is what people understand it, Being sinful is just being a bit naughty, It's not. It's hating God. It's hating other people, ultimately. That's what sinfulness is. So I tend to think of sinfulness in terms of self-centeredness, selfishness. My own inbuilt desire for satisfaction and pleasure my way. That's what, to me that's a more helpful way of thinking of sin. But we are at war with ourselves, aren't we? Because if you think about it, I've just said we're sinful, fundamentally, born that way. I've also been arguing that we're made in the image of God. Now, can you get two more opposite extremes than that? God on the one hand, gross, vile, foul, selfish desire for satisfaction on the other one. I don't care what I do, provided I feel good. They're pretty opposite, aren't they? So if we contain those two, it's hardly surprising that we get a bit stuck sometimes to know how to approach a problem. Excuse me, got COVID, dry throat. So, it really isn't, and it's not a new idea. I'm going to read you a great passage from Romans. If you're ever in a Bible study and someone's being a right pain in the neck, and they won't shut up, they're all full of everything they know, you get them to read this passage. And if even I'm prepared for this, and I'm unlikely to get through it without making a mistake. It's Romans 7, verses 15 to 25. Okay, here we go. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me. I made my mistake. I know that nothing good lives in me. That is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law. But I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. I mean, boys, that's the brilliant stuff there, but if you ever felt like being a Christian means you've got to have all the answers, then go back and have a look at that, because that's a fantastic illustration of someone who's being torn apart by temptation that they know is not something that's going to be good. Oops, Daisy. And I have found, in all honesty, if you pray about your temptations when you are in the midst of them, God is actually quite faithful and amazingly good at relieving you from that tension. So that's the thing. We're fundamentally selfish. And if in a sense, is there actually any water here anywhere? Got some water, please? Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, think of us a little bit like a live electrical cable. Yeah, it's live at the ends. It's dangerous to anything it touches. Well, it's dangerous to anyone who touches it. So you stay away from the end of a live cable, don't you? Because it can hurt you or kill you or damage things or cause fires. It's a very dangerous thing. That cable needs to be connected to something. If it's connected to something properly, then it's no longer dangerous. It's actually doing work. Okay? So that... Oh, thank you much, Jackie. You're a wonderful person. You're a creative person. You only wanted one sip. What a waste all that there. No. Look at that, Jackie. That water you wasted only wanted one sip. No, thank you very much. I much appreciate that. I shall have some more in a minute. Yeah, so, you know, we are made to be in a relationship with God. And if we're not, we are like that dangerous cable. Connect us and we can actually do something useful. We can make things work. Right? So that's what sin is, you know, our natural nature is like in us. It makes us dangerous until we're plugged into God, until we have a relationship with him. Okay? And then we get the final concluding thing, the tree of life. And as I said at the beginning, that the full extent of my duplicity and selfishness will come to the fore at the end of this, because I've actually done something really naughty. But let's read Genesis chapter 3, verses 21 to 24. The Lord made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. And the Lord said, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. And he drove the man out and placed him on the east side of the Garden of Eden, cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. So you see God separating humanity from the tree of life. That happens here, then the whole Bible happens. We get to the end of Revelation. Revelation chapter 22, which is, the very last book in the Bible. So all of that stuff's happened, all this, right? All the Bible. And then we get to this bit here at the end, in Revelation. I shall read you verses 21 to 24. Turn over the page. No, not 21 to 24. 1 to 5. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever. So, right here in Genesis at the beginning, we're getting separated from the tree of life, so we can't live forever. Then in this last chapter in the Bible, after all this stuff here has happened, just a few things, we get to Revelation chapter 22, when the way back to the tree of life is illustrated and shown and talked about. And we are now allowed, therefore, to have fruit from that tree of life. It says, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So we're separated from it here. The tree of life heals us here. So we got the sequence, haven't we, of creation, disaster, but then hope, and then redemption, recreation. That's the story of history. Even the stuff that hasn't yet happened. Right? So if, like me, you were genuinely frightened a few weeks ago, it's never happened to me before, I've got to be honest, but we had the Taliban overtaking Afghanistan, we had COVID, and we have global warming. And I thought, crikey, those are three frightening things. And I was frightened, and that's never happened to me before. But we mustn't forget, not just what's said at the beginning of the Bible about the tree of life and the end of the Bible, but we must remember all this stuff here. I'm currently reading the Bible all the way through for about the third time, I think, and it really is worth doing, because it's all such amazing stuff. Right? So, let's just finish with a prayer, shall we, about, just asking God to help us understand all this stuff. Father God, you are a creative God. You are way beyond our understanding and comprehension. Yet, you have made us a little lower than angels. You are mindful of us. And you actually love us. And you're a God we can love. Even when horrible, horrible things are happening, you're still there. And we don't understand why the horrible things happen, apart from sinfulness on a grand scale. But we thank you that this universe, this life, everything that we know has been made for a purpose. It's not random. We thank you we're made in your image, that we have the potential to love and create. We are sorry for our sin, which is our natural state also, and for the selfishness we exhibit and the bad things that we do. But we are excited beyond belief at this notion that there is redemption, that there is life ahead, that this tree of life that we've been separated from is something that we can regain access to. We thank you that Jesus showed us what you are like and made you accessible to all of us. Amen.